pardon me, just over, just over an hour together. I want to do some more of that, actually sort of setting us some questions, some things to think about. Because I do think through discussion, through sort of chewing this stuff over, that's where the gold really comes. That's where the good stuff comes from. Because working as Ari said, I lead a youth and children's organisation, working in schools over in Hitchin, working in over 15 secondary and primary schools. And a big thing that we constantly want to do with children and young people is drive home them. Ask that why. Question that why, because it's in that. And even as we read our Bible, that's where we get the great stuff from, isn't it? When we look at it and we say, hang on, Jesus, why? Why is this? Why did that happen? Why did this happen? And so I will be asking you, and lots of going through, do question that. Think about that why. As you all know, working with young people, I'm used to interruptions, used to interaction, all of that sort of stuff. And so through this, I've got a few things I want to share. And then I'll sort of have a time of discussion. And because it's nice actually, sort of this intimate number of us, hopefully we'll be able to get that good discussion around the room and not just in pockets. So fancy that journey? Wonderful, wonderful. But let me start with telling you a story about the Cucalecha Bridge in Honduras. It's tough to get there, let alone say it. And this bridge, right, this place in Honduras, Cucalecha, it's in the middle of like extreme weather fronts coming in. And so it's faced with lots and lots of tropical storms. And basically this bridge kept getting washed away. So around 1930, they got the world's leading architects and structural engineers to build an unbreakable bridge. That's what they did. And in 1998, Storm Mitch came sweeping through and destroyed everything but that bridge. The thing is, overnight, that bridge did what it was designed for. It stayed firm. It stood the test of the challenges, yet it became redundant because everything around it had moved. Everything had changed, yet that bridge stood firm. And it actually gives me a picture of where we find ourselves today. Everything has changed. On the 20th of March, 2020, everything changed. Schools went into lockdown. We were told to stay at home. Everything changed. And as we start to emerge, the landscape has changed. And we have to question, what is it we have to do? What is it we have to change? How do we emerge from this time so that we can work with these young people that God has called us to work with? That we can help change lives. Because perhaps what was before is just not right for the space that we find ourselves today. And, just thinking about this context that we find ourselves in, and I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, however, but we're not over this pandemic yet. I work in schools in Hitchin, and just this morning, just as I was coming here, I checked my emails, and I get an email from a teacher. We're just starting up our Christian unions in school, and he says, sorry, but we're having to work out our COVID restriction plans, and nobody else can come in school right now. So we're not over this pandemic yet. Things are still happening. This still means there's a lot of change. Still means there's a huge amount of uncertainty looming. And especially for young people. Think about those in your youth group. Huge amount of uncertainty around exams. They've seen what's happened in the last 2 years, last two sets of exams for both GCSE and A-level, and we still don't have answers. So there's a lot of uncertainty still looming. Family situations may be getting worse. Acutely aware that, we're currently, there would have been more of us here today, but there's a fuel crisis. The energy firms are raising their prices. The furlough scheme has stopped. There's going to be a lot of challenges in our families, in and around our families. And obviously our young people are going to feel much of this pressure. People are on a continuum of how they feel about re-engaging. Walking through schools, I see a variety of different things, from those that are wearing masks and gloves to those that are pretty much trying to hold every door handle they can and everything in between. People are in different spaces and places as we re-engage with normal life. And we don't know everybody's backstory. We don't know what people are managing, what's happening. So we've got a lot of questions that we've got to think about. And probably the biggest thing is I find there's a lot of hollow hope out there. And actually, God calls us to give holy hope through all that we do. So why is this important to be aware of as we think about how we reclaim, regather, restore, and rebuild? Well, because it sets the backdrop, the landscape. It sets the space and the place, the parameters that we must exist in. And so there's three things I want us to think about. And the idea is we'll think a bit about each point, have a bit of a discussion, come back and see where we get to. Because let's say if you're looking for answers, perhaps you should be downstairs, because I'm probably going to set out more questions for us. But again, in that, I think that's important, because I won't know your context. I won't know the families you're working with. I won't know the things that are happening in and around your church, your town, your city, where you might be based. And so that's why I think questions are often helpful for us to wrestle with. So the three things we're going to be thinking about is proactive over reactive. Second is play the long game. And the third is people over programs. So we're going to think about each of these points and then say we'll have some discussion. But the very first one, proactive over reactive. If we wind the clock back to, as Carl said this morning, pre-COVID, do you remember those days? It does. In some days it feels like a blink of an eye, and other times it feels like a very, very long time. But rewind back to February 2020, things were normal. COVID was something that was happening out somewhere in the east of the world. It hadn't quite darkened our doors as yet. And I remember reading and listening about this every day. Now, I don't know if anybody else has got an Alexa. Anyone else got a smart speaker at home? Or, there are other brands. For me, actually, one of the things I've done with that, thinking about in technology, is I have a flash briefing. So after I've done my Bible in the morning, which is fact, what I do first, then as I'm getting ready, I play my flash briefing, which always starts with the most important thing, people, the sport update. Then BBC News, but then World News. And I've actually, if you don't already listen to World News, I'd really encourage you to listen to it, because it does give us a really good picture about what's happening outside of our own setting. That can be a really good conversation starter with young people. But they were talking about this COVID happening in Italy and obviously what was happening in China and whatnot. And it enabled me to talk to my team, saying, look, this thing is real. And it's coming, and so every day I'd be tracking what's going on. So actually to the point that we sat down early March, and I said, look, I don't know the future, but I see something coming, and if Italy's anything to go by, there's a chance our schools are probably going to shut maybe after Easter. And so I said, let's just dream about what we would do if all of this happened. Because we want to be proactive and not reactive. And in this moment, we took some time. We created a virtual mentoring program. Just an idea, worked out the policies, how it all work, had it all sitting there, just in case we had to react and we wanted to be proactive. What did I know? 20th of March, Boris Johnson comes onto the radio. Still remember pulling up outside my house, listening to the radio, and he says schools will shut. They will not return on Monday. By the Tuesday the following week, which is actually the 23rd of March, we were mentoring young people virtually because we'd been proactive over reactive. We looked at what was coming and we made decisions based on what we knew. And we wanted to be proactive instead of reactive. Now, what happens when we're reactive? Anyone give me an idea of how you feel when you just react? Me too. I don't know what to do. I literally freeze. That is one of the things. When it comes to reacting, we freeze. When we react, it can be quite stressful. We panic. Anyone ever panicked when you just got to react to something? If you've ever had that moment, you might have had it on a Sunday morning, your youth leader, your youth pastor might say, I've got a croaky voice. You're leading a talk this morning. And you're like, no. You freak. We panic when we react. We can lose focus. Again, wind the clock back. When all of this happened, you may have been, obviously we had one program we'd sorted out, but there's still a lot of stuff we were trying to work out. We're like, oh my word, we hadn't planned for how big this would be. So we panic, we lose focus. We waste time and energy. We waste sanity being pulled in a variety of directions. Anybody with me on this when we panic? We're pulled in multiple directions. We generate more panic around us with everybody else. Have you ever done that? You're like, don't panic, everyone, it's fine. And everybody else is panicking with you because we generate that. When we react, that's a lot of what happens. So why is being proactive healthier? Healthier for all? Well, first of all, it is actually less stressful. When we're proactive, when we look ahead, when we think about it, we're less stressful. Again, think about the young people you're with. When it comes to exam times or anything like that, how many of them wait to revise until the night before? Yeah, how do they feel then? They are stressed. And then you've got little Dennis who's like, guys, I thought about this ages ago. And he's had his study program and he's working on it. And he's still feeling a bit stressed, but he's much, much better because he's been proactive. It's less stressful. We work as a team. It helps us understand the landscape that we're in. You're more prepared. You have more control when you're proactive. It helps you make informed choices. It gives space for thinking and for questioning. Going back to this program we set up, we had time to wrestle with stuff. How do we do this? Who's ever used Zoom before? Not me, right? What do we do? How do we record it? How do I speak to as a charity, we've got trustees. How do I engage with people? How do I speak to schools while everyone's still there? We can go in. We were proactive, so we ironed out all these things. It gave us time to question. It gave us time to think, to process. When you're proactive, you ask how, why, what, who, when, all of these different things. But most importantly, you work with what you know. When we're reacting, we're trying to solve everything. When you're proactive, actually you're saying, well, look, what do we know right now? We don't know everything, but we know this bit. So let's work with that. You can always change and adapt. And I think, again, as Carl said, as Tim said, we've done certain things and we've had to adapt as we've gone on. So when we're proactive, it enables us to do that with hopefully less stress. We work with what we know. We can always change and adapt. Theodore Roosevelt once said, in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. And again, as in the culture we find ourselves these days, I think we often get panic and freeze because we don't want to do the wrong thing. Whereas sometimes we just have to do the next best thing. And that's part of being proactive. And as we think about being proactive, and as we move forward to regather, to reclaim, to rebuild, and to restore, some of the key questions we need to ask ourselves are, what are the needs of our young people? Physically, mentally, emotionally, socially. And of course, our big one, spiritually. But it's actually all of these aspects that we need to wrestle with, we need to think about. We need to ask these questions. How can we restore connection with those that have become disconnected? How do we do that? How do you rebuild relationships with young people, with team, with the church? Again, many churches, as we've gone through this time, have had very separate things because we've had to. I've got 2 small children. We're trying to help them engage with their digital online church, and then my wife Claire and I are then trying to do our bit. And sometimes that goes well. Most of the time it doesn't. But how do we rebuild these connections? What does that look like? Be willing to question things. So I'm a big fan of the question why. And as a side note, if you've ever seen Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, has anyone ever heard of that or ever heard of Simon Sinek? Great TED Talk, well worth watching. Really important. Again, a great thing for young people. They're so driven often by why, the reasoning for things, to help us think about that. Be willing to question these things. Be willing to wrestle with it. In school, actually, I actually often asked schools, teachers, senior leaders to ask this question, why? As I had a discussion with some people today, we're saying that, our young people live and learn in a space where they're very rarely encouraged to question stuff. The education system is built for them to recite knowledge, Not even knowledge, facts, figures, do certain things. And I love teachers. It's not teachers' problem. It's the system itself. The system is broken in that sense. And so when they come to church and we want them to live and have that faith, that life-changing faith, that when they face those struggles, when they face those questions, when they face those issues, it's built on a rock and not on sand. We need to create that safe space where they can ask why, they can doubt, and we're okay with that. And part of that is us being proactive, being okay with that, and not panicking because little Billy has said, hang on a second, I've never known anyone to rise from the dead. And we can't go, oh my, well, we've got to be willing to wrestle with this stuff, question this stuff, and create a space. And as we look to rebuild, are we looking to rebuild what was? Let's go back to that bridge for a moment. It stood the test of the storm, but was it fit for purpose? The whole world around it had changed. Are we looking to rebuild as was? Is the bridge still fit for purpose? How can we rebuild better, stronger, longer lasting as we come into this new space and place that we find ourselves? So there's a question that I want us to wrestle with. And we're going to have a few minutes to discuss this. I'd love to hear what you think. Where have you been reactive? Okay, think about it. Over this past 18 months, where have you been reactive in your youth ministry? And what are the 1, 2, or 3 things you could do to be proactive as we move forward? And I think that's important. I would love you to leave this space with at least one thing you think, do you know what, this is what we're going to try. Because again, we make the decisions on what we know. We don't know everything. And we can always change and adapt. But let's take 5 minutes to discuss this, and we'd love some feedback. Love to hear what you think. Ebony, sorry, Ebony. Yeah, we did very. Interesting. Because even at saying that, the reactions then made you then be proactive. So, like, what do you do? How do you know? And so they're not dichotomy in a sense, but yeah, we still have it for lots of reasons, spaces. But, I think there was a bit of romantisation too. Okay, I'm going to bring us back. Just, I'd love to hear what you're thinking, what you thought. So it's our opportunity, as we were talking earlier about how do we get young people to share testimonies. It's our opportunity to be brave. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear some of what you thought, even questions. You can disagree. Again, I'm happy with that. Anyone brave enough to kick us off? Yeah. Oh, sorry. We're going back to school style. Hand up. Hand up. As I say in the young people, I'm not listening. Unless your hand's up, I'm not listening. So, sorry. We'll come second.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we had with just in COVID in general, I think we weren't prepared for it to last a certain amount of time. So I think sometimes it was, we're dealing with this, we only expect this to last, I don't know, a month. And then when it didn't last a month and it lasted longer, we weren't prepared for the time after that point. We just kind of were ready for what we had. We didn't expect it to be a lasting thing. And beyond that as well, I think, I had a brain fart, my mind's gone blank, sorry.
No, that's a really good point, and just why you think of it is something we'd talked over here. And again, that's part of working with what you know. And even in that, it's easy for me to say, be proactive and not react. I still, a lot of this, there was still a lot of reaction, a lot of panic. And, we can't be proactive in every sense, but we're trying to say, okay, even from that now reaction we've had, how do we stop and not just rush and question? See, like I say, for this next month, because we all thought it was only going to be 6 weeks, that's what they said to us, then it's gone. And so we're like, okay, we can do this for 6 weeks, but then how do we get to a point of saying, if this is longer, what do we do different? How do we manage this? What do we think about? Do you remember your second thing?
Yeah, I do. So what it was as well is that we had a lot of youth, like we had youth to where I felt like there's 2 years until they go off to university. And then what happened was COVID happened and now they're straight off to university because all that time got erased. So there's things that I thought I had more time to prep them for, and then suddenly that time was gone. So I think it's kind of treating things in a way in which there's more of an urgency to kind of get certain things to the youth, and don't overestimate how much time you possibly have with them, but be prepared to kind of get them ready now.
And that's a proactive step, isn't it? Right, let's not think we've got 2 years, we've got to start thinking, laying that stuff in. In fact, it's something I will touch on possibly in the next bit is about, in the long game as we think about it, I'm going to touch on some of that stuff going off to university. So what's your name, sorry? Dylan. What were you going to say, Dylan?
So similar in terms of we had a lot of people that were going to uni, and so the way we run youth was very different. And they were getting involved in worship and reading the Bible. But now, I think everyone can say it's a lot younger. So it's a very different youth group. And I think we've been trying to cater to their needs. Rather than actually focusing on Christ. Because we're trying to engage them and play games, but we should really focus on actually, okay, they're here to learn about Christ and to either start their journey or carry on.
Yeah, and again, a lot of this stuff, and that's why I say to question and to wrestle with this, is because these aren't simple questions, because it sounds like you're trying to do a really good balance there of actually we need to engage to connect, but then we need to remember why we're here, what makes us different to the youth group down the road. And so again, and how do we proactively do some of that is going to help? And, I will encourage you, think about what's worked over COVID, even for the older young people, as the younger young people come through, they're still having to deal with a lot of this stuff. What are the good things that we can take forward that are going to enhance and improve and grow our ministry for the long term? Any other thoughts quickly before we move on to our next point? Yes. So it's Alice.
Yeah, I think it's kind of been mentioned, but I think one thing we thought of at the end was to be more proactive, actually just being prepared to just not do anything straight away, because I think the reaction is often like we need to fill this gap, we need to do something, but I think it's really hard not to do because you always want to feel like you want to fill the need and everything, but it's actually just stopping and asking those questions and actually speaking to young people individually to find what they need, because sometimes I've assumed like, oh, that hasn't worked, or I don't think they're really engaging, and then you speak to them, they're like, oh yeah, I really like that, and you're like, oh, I shouldn't presume.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, too often we can be a pendulum, and we're like, whoa, we're this way, and then we swing that way, and actually sometimes we just, even if we're on one side, we're like, let's just try it, but commit to it, and see what happens. Maybe it's 6 months, and if we find out after 6 months it hasn't worked, that's okay. especially if we've done it in connection and relationship and conversation. But, how often have things, like you say, you've done it and you've just thought, oh, let's not work because maybe they've not said something or done something. But inside, little Janie or little Terry, they're questioning stuff, they're thinking about stuff, and they're like, wow. So it's important to, like I say, as part of that practice, just to try things, to go through that. So the second thing we're going to think about is the long game. And as we look to rebuild, restore, regather, and reclaim, we're looking to build our house on the rock. That's what we want. We want, it's like we've moved into Youth Ministry 3.0. Mark Ostreicher wrote a book a while ago, Youth Ministry 2.0. It feels like we've gone to the next stage now because of everything we've been through. And this is not just a spiritual question, but this is one of longevity. And as we begin to emerge, and interesting, one of the things we're actually saying at schools now, we're saying we're not over COVID, we're emerging from it, because there are still bumps in this road. There are still, as I said right at the beginning, many, many uncertainties to come. And as we rebuild for the future, and not just for next term, next academic year, or even for our church's 3-year strategy or vision, we want to build youth ministry. As Dylan, you're saying, you've got a younger group now, that maybe they're 11, they're hopefully going to be with you for the next 8 years. So we need to be building with that vision in mind, that long game in mind. And when COVID landed here, it threw us into a tailspin. All of us. Unprecedented is a word that has become regular in our vocabulary, because nobody had ever been through any of this before. We went into lockdown with the impression, as we were saying here, that it was just going to be a short time. A couple of weeks after Easter, people gone. Nothing to worry about. 18 months later, we still know there's a journey to go. We had to learn quickly, we had to adapt. Almost daily, we had to do our best in a difficult situation. Even as a team, we'd often talk about a week in COVID times felt like 6 months in real life, with the amount of change that could happen in an instant, and what that meant. And so we may have made a bunch of mistakes. We definitely made a phase, we definitely made loads of mistakes, but we also made some great progression. We learned some things that we'd never even considered to do. And as an organisation, our big thing is face-to-face connection, much like church youth work. We work only in Hitchin schools because we can build a long-term relationship with young people, with children, with schools, so that we can see that long-term change, just like church. Suddenly we weren't able to do that, so we had to learn, and we had to adapt, and we had to grow, we had to question. And we had to work with what we knew. We know a lot more now. And so we feel we can play the long game. We feel we can think ahead. We feel that we can take forward the best of what we learned during COVID. And again, as I work in schools and even speak to youth workers in my area, I try to remind them, don't just chuck everything out that was COVID style, because some of that could just be real gold and really useful that's going to connect. And sometimes it's not a mistake, isn't actually a mistake, it's just another step in that learning. And hands up if you've ever used a Post-it note. Pretty much. A phenomenal piece of equipment, is that not right? And I don't know if you know the story of how a Post-it note came around, but the guy at 3M, his name was Dr. Spencer Silver, he was trying to create one of the most strong adhesives the world had ever seen. That is what he was trying to create. It was actually to be used on planes, and that was his job. That's what he'd been commissioned to do, to create this adhesive, the strongest adhesive the world had ever seen to date. What he created was a low-tack glue. Now, I don't know about you, but if that was his, that's what his boss has said, Spence, this is what you've got to do, and he rocks back up with a low-tack adhesive, there's not much promotion happening there. But he was like, this is crazy. And he just thought, he almost threw it away. But he just thought, surely there could be some use. So in fact, he and his colleague, they started messing around with it on their lunch breaks. Just messing around. In the end, he realized this glue, it was low-tack, so low-tack that he could stick it something, take it off, and there was no mark. And it could re-stick. And then what he did is they just started to they were just drawing on some paper and they stuck it on and they're like, I'll take that with me tonight and take it home. And then what they did is they thought, we'll test it. And so he just put a pile of they weren't called Post-it notes at the time. They had a much less interesting phrase that they'd used for them at the time. But they put them in the office. And overnight, it changed communication and working in their team. And then they just marketed it. But it all came from his thing of trying to make the most strong, impactful, indestructible adhesive, and he created a Post-it note. Brilliant. And sometimes it's actually in our mistakes. We can't just look at it and say, that was a mistake, that was no good. Sometimes it's from that we have our eureka moment. As he said, I thought we have here, it's not just a bookmark, it's a whole new way of communicating just through a Post-it note. And as we regather, reclaim, restore, rebuild, how can the best of what you've discovered help and impact the ministry, the long-term ministry that you have? How can you keep some of that blended youth work, some of those programs to help those young people going off to uni? I know we're in lots of ways we're probably sick of Zoom. But what happens? What's the statistics around young people going off to uni and disconnecting with the church? It's huge. But what could it look like if we say, do you know what, guys? We're going to have our regular youth work, but once a month we're all going to meet on Zoom. Just a quick 20-minute check-in. How does that enable Billy and Sally when they go off to their university to know that I know no matter what happens, I'm going to have 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it is, to connect with people who know me, who love me. It's not going to be weird or awkward because I've gone off to uni now, I've got to do the Zoom thing. It's part of what we do. It's growing that connection. Again, thinking about, the mental health of children and young people, suddenly, the rates of suicide in young males especially, what age does it start at? 18. What happens at 18? Their whole support network disappears overnight if they go off to uni, or even sometimes work, even if they're staying at home, because so many of their friends have gone off. They lose that. So how can we take some of the best of what we've got to enable, to equip, to be with them? Absolute positive side notes is people. Keep them engaged. They're going to be your next leaders, helpers when they're back. So what are you doing? You're already preparing them for the next step in their ministry too. How do we use some of this stuff to help us play that long game? And playing the long game is about having that vision together. It's about learning together. It's about journeying together. When I say together, it's not just about you as a team, but you as the young people. When we play the long game, when we're proactive over reactive, we're saying to them, guys, we're going to try this. Because they might be like, we don't need Zoom anymore. We can all be back together. I know, but let's just think, what if things change that we don't know about? What about when you go away? What about this? What about that? Let's try it. Let's talk about it. Let's journey together. Let's work together. Let's learn together. And like a sat-nav, I'm sure many of you used the sat-nav to get here today. When you put a journey into a sat-nav, you know where you're going, but sometimes the route's very different. Is that fair? And it's the same. Where are we going? Where do we want to be? We want to be where these young people are connected, are the lifeblood of our church, and not just about our church, but about them having a living, real faith. Sometimes the journey to that is very, very different. And that's why when we play the long game is so, so important. Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, said, fire bullets, then cannonballs. Fire bullets, then cannonballs. And what he means, it's almost Alice, as you were saying, about, almost that pendulum. He talks about, don't just chuck everything at one thing and say, that's going to work. Because if it fails, that's a lot of time, energy, patience, stress, panic. He says, 5 bullets. Get your aim. Test it. And then once you know it's work, go all in. Do it. So we're playing a long game. It's doing something. It's not just jumping to the next big thing, but testing some things, thinking about it. Don't just rush that next big thing. Don't just jump on what you saw on TikTok or anything else. Ask questions. What has worked? What sits with your context? What sits with your young people? What can you keep? What have you learned? And how can this help you play the long game? And so there's another question for us to discuss. And that's, what might the long game choices, questions, or actions be for your group? Choices, questions, and actions. And we're going to take just 5 minutes to discuss this. And we'd love to, again, hear your thoughts or even your questions. So let's turn back in our groups for a few moments.
Like a wave in the ocean, going through the motions. I've been moving endlessly. Sick of all the striving, tired of living like a song without a melody. Exhausted.
Okay, just going to bring us back. I know, aware also that we want to honour people's time to make sure you can get away on time. And so we'd love any thoughts that come from that, again, these aren't small questions. These aren't small questions, but yeah, anybody willing to share or any questions, thoughts? Yeah. I like a brave person.
So we were talking about our kind of context. So we have we had a big change in our church where most of our youth moved on and went to uni, and we got the new group from year 7, year 8, year 9s coming in, and kind of like disrupted all like the structure that we used to have. And the safe space that we used to have, the confidence of like speaking up and everything, and being comfortable with each other. And now we kind of find ourselves in a situation where we, something proactive to do would be to create a new foundation. So find something that where we can be strong on, stand strong on, and then build a structure to then obviously when they grow up and then leave us and go uni, then they'll be ready to actually start their lives and be confident and be comfortable to go out and meet people and share their thoughts and share their faith and all that stuff.
Yeah, and we were talking, if you've got young people in your group, we also have to be aware that they're in some ways some of those that have been hugely impacted by the lockdown, because they were at a time when they were just forming that ability to connect, to communicate, to grow friendships. Also, many of them, obviously, if they're in year 6 as it started, they've had this transition from primary to secondary school without the transition that they're used to or would have hoped to have had. And so much change that we're seeing, again, a lot in our area and from those that I speak to around, big friendship issues and difficulties because they just don't have those social skills. Then we're expecting to rock up to a youth group and talk and discuss. And so again, we coming back to asking some of those questions and thinking about that proactive, think about that long game is important to understand some of that context. But by having that vision, hopefully that propels things forward bit by bit. And that's what we're trying to do. Any one more thought? If not, okay. So our final thing is people over programs, and so you leave here today, no doubt, with your 5-point proactive steps, your long-term game plan that you're going to implement. Then what happens? People mess it up. Yeah, I have amazing plans. People mess it up. Everyone, whatever age or stage we find ourselves at, everybody has been through the struggle and the challenges and the difficulties of these past 18 months. And the reality is, as I said, we're not over it. And that's not to be a bearer of bad news, but again, it's to set out to be proactive. If we think we're over it, we are going to end up reacting because the world changes around us. That bridge is not fit for purpose. If we're proactive, we're saying, we're not over this, people. We've just got to take it step by step. There are still many bumps in the road, and we need to hold our programs lightly. And remember, it's about people first and foremost. When you read the Gospels, when you look at Jesus, so many of the things he said and what he told his disciples to do, feed them. We've done, not worrying about the next sermon here, guys. Feed them. When people came to him, he didn't start telling them about God's love. He showed God's love first. He held, I love it. You see Jesus so often fulfilled a need before he did anything else. So we've got to hold our programs lightly because it is about people. And as we know, people are hurting. It's difficult. And when I was putting this together, there was a whole range of statistics and data that I could throw at you. And I just wanted to highlight a few, and I'm not going to read from them all. But, just to fully understand, 1 in 6 children aged 5 to 16 were identified as having a probable mental health problem in July 2020. And then that's a huge increase from 1 in 9 in 2017. We don't quite have the data following the pandemic. But what we do know is it's got worse. Number of young people attending A&E is just been huge with, a recorded diagnosis of a psychiatric condition has more than tripled. So many different things. 80% of young people with mental health needs agreed that the coronavirus pandemic has made their mental health worse. Huge things. Suicide. Not something we talk about much in church, but suicide was the leading cause of death for males between 5 to 34. 5 to 34. That was in 2009. And in the last 3 years, the likelihood of young people having a mental health problem has increased by 50%. This is the context we find ourselves in. Youthscape have just released some new findings, and Carl shared a quote from Rachel Gardner from Youthscape earlier. That actually young people's satisfaction with life has decreased over the last sort of 10 years. It's just been steadily, you can see a graph steadily going down. Lower life satisfaction at the age of 14 predicts a more negative mental health outcome at the age of 17. So it's vital. What we are doing is vital, because you may be that lifeline. You may be that one person that young person feels believes in them. Now, I don't know what all of your young people's home lives are like, but I guarantee not all of them will be great homes. So you may well be that one adult, that one role model that shows love and care. That is important. So some days, on that Tuesday night when you're tired and you just want to be at home because you're still waiting to watch the last episode of Vigil or something like that, remember that you turning up and being present for that young person can actually save a life, both physically and spiritually. Poor mental health, it is big, huge in those struggling with sexual identity. And again, in church, people will have many thoughts and ideas, and it's not something I want us to get into today, but what we have to understand, that any young people that is struggling with sexual identity or identity in its largest context are more likely to self-harm and are more likely to attempt suicide. Are we willing, whatever we personally believe, to create a safe space where they can express themselves? And it's a challenge. A really big challenge. And we know also the next biggest factor on them is income. And as I said right at the beginning, what are we seeing right now? We're seeing, a decrease in family income, more pressure on those who are on the verge of breaking point financially. Anyhow, it's getting worse. Our young people need us to care wholeheartedly for them first and foremost. The program is second. They don't care what we know until they know that we care. Think for a moment. Now, I say this to teachers all the time. Think in your mind of your favourite teacher at school. Just picture them. Aurea, tell me your favourite teacher at school. He's really strong. Aurea didn't go to school. Naughty Aurea.
I didn't like a lot of my teachers. So.
No? Okay, somebody tell me one teacher you remember at school.
Second.
Or primary, doesn't matter. Yeah? What was their name? Yeah, why was she really great? Sorry, what's your name? Ruth, thank you, Ruth. You've done exactly, thank you for doing exactly what I wanted. They don't care what you know until they know that you care. That music teacher, it will break her heart to know that you may not remember much of what she taught you, but you remember how she made you feel. You remember that she believed in you, that she would listen, that she would care. Again, let's look at Jesus. How he treats that woman at the well. He doesn't start berating her, treats her with love, changes her life. It's so important. And given the prevalence of mental health problems in children and young people, it's no surprise that psychotherapists on TikTok have just exploded. They've amassed millions of followers and likes over the past year. How we treat people, the time that we give them, our willingness to put our program to the side, to love them, to care for them, is the most important. I just want to share a story from Mum. She's got a short video clip that Chris can put up in a moment. And this is a story of a mum from our virtual mentoring program. A young girl who was really, really struggling. And she had been through CAMS, which is Child and Adolescent Mental Health Support Services. She's had psychiatrists. She's had so many high-level interventions and still very, very broken. And her mum come to us with, she didn't really know much about us. She knew that we worked at her daughter's school. And she said, look, can you help? And we would just have a phone call, every week since the end of March to even this week. And what it's done is given hope to that family. I just want us just a minute to listen to what she has to say.
All I can really say is that without Fraser's help in the last year, I don't think we would have made it through what has been the most challenging time in our lives. Our child was struggling with a lot of issues before COVID-19 had even been discovered. It's difficult to say how much repeated lockdowns, homeschooling and other life events have added to an already confusing situation. But throughout these tough times, and despite being under the umbrella of CAMS, the most consistent help we've had throughout has been from the FASE team. FASE has worked one-to-one with one of my children, and the conversations that the staff and my child have improved their self-esteem and their mood. Having someone who will listen to whatever they need to talk about without judgment on a regular basis has just really benefited them. And knowing that they'll have that opportunity to open up or just talk about their area of interest has helped them feel valued and validated.
Just from those phone calls, as that mum called me to let me know what had done, she said, you've given us hope. She actually asked us to pray for her. So we're a Christian organisation working in schools, so we don't always get to share faith how we want, but she knew that was who we were, and she asked us to pray for her. Our consistency was the most important thing to that family. What we did, we didn't do anything crazy. We talked to her daughter, we listened to her. But every week her mum would say she gets off that phone call and I see a glimpse, just a glimpse of my daughter. Not doing any programs, not doing anything crazy, just listening. We didn't have the answers. We just showed love and care and gave time. And as we think about people over programs, we also need to be aware of our team. Our team have been through this same space and time and struggle and difficulty. Perhaps our vision, our plans, our programs, our expectations are too much of a stretch right now for anyone. There would have been more people here today, but they couldn't risk using that fuel because they've got work on Monday or got other things. People have had to make difficult choices and decisions. And so perhaps actually we have to change our idea of what's expected right now and what's the context we find our young people, our families, our team in. When Elijah was at his lowest point in 2 Kings, God told him to eat and drink and sleep. Then he woke him up to make sure he ate some more, he drank some more, then he got him some more sleep. And we have to be aware of our physical needs. Whether you're a youth leader, pastor, worker, volunteer, helper, whatever label you're given or have, we have to be aware of this. We have to think about our physical needs and also the physical needs of those around us. Because it affects our emotional, our mental, our social and our spiritual well-being. What are the needs of the young people you serve? What's happening in your area? What's happening in your context? I work in Hitchin, which is a relatively affluent area. There is a huge, huge drive to resource the food bank. You look on paper, Hitchin shouldn't need a food bank, but it does. What does that tell me? It says that there are hungry families out there that need feeding. And maybe I speak to them every day, but I don't know. What questions are we going to ask? How do we love and care and learn this about our families that are around us? The effects of the pandemic are going to keep rippling out. It's like a stone has been dropped in a pond. And we think, oh, the stone's gone now. But those ripples will just carry on. And so over the next 6, 12, 18 months, we're going to be getting the effects of this. With your young youth group, they're going to be out working this over the coming years. What are the needs of the young people we serve? Their families. And this may sound bleak. This may sound like, wow, Kieran, we're ready to go out there now. Thanks. Going to invite you again. However, there is an exciting opportunity to show real life-changing faith. In the midst of all of this, there is this great opportunity, and sometimes it's at the cost of our programs. When that mum sent me that story, when she emailed me that, I cried reading what she had written. We hadn't changed anything that was going on. Her daughter still struggles. Their family is still having an extremely hard time. But the one thing that had changed is they had some hope. They knew that there was somebody who would listen to them, that would actually pick up a phone. And it broke my heart when I spoke to her early in March 2020 or late in March 2020 when she said, "Thank you for calling back, because you are the 7th person I've called and nobody has got back to me." Even recalling that now makes me sad. What an opportunity we have as the church to share that hope, to call those people back, to knock on that door, to say to that young person, let me take you for a coffee, a burger, or a chicken nuggets, whatever it might be. I want to listen to you. I want to give you time. And so how do we do this? I want to encourage us to create space. Create space to share, to be real, to be honest, to be vulnerable. And again, it's a challenge for us as youth leaders, as Tim said it, even in that digital challenge, we've got to do it first and foremost. What do young people need to see right now? Well, actually, they need to see leaders who are real. And that's not that we share all of our struggles and issues and difficulties. We've got to do it well and wisely. We've also got to show them that we can be vulnerable, that we're able to say that it's tough, that we can share. Because how does it feel if somebody stands there and says, "My life's perfect. Tell me how bad yours is, Dylan." That's not encouraging you to share, is it? You're like, "Oh, great, I just feel you." No, we've got to, and Dylan's got a great life, by the way, I hope. Please, Lord. We've got to be willing to share, create space for vulnerability. And again, not just for our young people, but in our teams. If you're leading your team, I want to encourage you next time you meet and you say, "Hey, what can we pray for?" Share first, share real. Because you will enable other people around you to say, "Do you know what? This is what's happened." I remember years ago, my home group, not in this church, in a previous one, but it influenced how I approach home groups from there on in. We used to meet every week and we did the very good Christian thing. "How are you?" "Good, good." "How's life?" "Busy, busy." "Good, good." "Anything we can pray for?" "Oh, I just wish I had a bit more time." That's all. Life is good. Until one day, my best friend came and they said to him, "How are you today?" And I knew what he was going on, but it's not, don't share at home group, people. Don't want to share with other Christians. And he started off and then he stopped and he says, "That's a lie." So everything I say is a lie. He said, "I'm really struggling." And he listed out 4 or 5 big things he was struggling with. And everyone did the right thing. They said, "We can pray." And he said, "Thanks," and we prayed. And then went to the next person, said, "How are you?" And they went, "I can't lie." And for the next 2 hours, people shared openly and honestly. It revolutionized my faith. It changed. It encouraged me. I was like, "Man, I've never seen this before. And he's my best friend. That is crazy." It encouraged me to go into situations to say that if the only way I'm going to see change happen is if I'm real. And share some of that. And it's tough. It's difficult. But we want our young people to have real faith. They need to see what real faith looks like. So create space. Offer hope, and not hollow hope, but holy hope. Steve Peters is a guy who's written The Chimp Paradox. Has anyone ever heard of that book? No, great book. Really encourage it. Fantastic. Read Professor Steve Peters' Chimp Paradox. And he talks about offering, I was just listening to a podcast where he's interviewed about his new book coming out, and he says, we've got to offer real hope, not just platitudes. Again, in church, we're really good at saying, oh, I'll pray for that. Pray for that. Oh, it'll be okay. God's with you. If you can't put food on the table, does it feel like God's with you? Sometimes we've got to offer holy hope, which says, I don't have the answers, and that's tough, and I'm maybe not even sure how God's working this. We need to trust, and we'll pray, and is there anything we can do? Can I help take you to a place or do whatever? Sometimes we've got to check ourselves and think, am I just offering a platitude? Or is it hollow hope or holy hope that I'm offering? And again, this isn't, I don't want to put us down. We've got to question this ourselves, and we've got to work into it and build a culture where this happens. As I said, they don't care what we know until they know that we care. We've got to think about how we can pastorally care for our young people, our team, and the families that we serve. Do you, for instance, when they get dropped off, do you have anyone that just stops and tries to grab 2 minutes with the parents to find out how they're doing? How many of your parents, males, are under 45 in your youth group? Just hands up if you've got even one. So you might have somewhere around that. Again, look at those statistics of suicide. We know that men struggle. We know that church is always sometimes a difficult place to be, well, life is difficult to be vulnerable. How are we just connecting with those people to say, how are you doing? How have you found lockdown? What's going on? How's school at the moment? Are they instigated COVID protocols? What's going on? Take 2 minutes. One thing that the church did here really well, they did a drive-through sort of children's church early on in COVID, and I was working. My wife took our children, and she called me on the way out, and she was crying. And I was like, oh, that obviously went well. But they were actually happy tears because she said they did great things with Lily and Daniel, our two children, and so they were sort of organising stuff at the back of the car, and at the front of the car, they stopped to ask Claire how she was doing, and just ask a question like, what can we pray for? And listed 2 or 3 things that pretty much every parent in lockdown was struggling with. And they prayed for, this is the church come to, prayed. And Claire she cried tears of joy because it was like somebody could see my struggle. How can we create that space to be pastoral to our young people, our team, and our families? Think about how, what resources, and as Phase, what we've done over the whole lockdown, we've created a lot of resources, all for free. So if you head to our website, phase-hitchin.org, and go to our resources page, there's lots of tools that you can use in pastoral work with young people. Free. Use them, please. They're there to be used. We've loved being able to give away what we've got so that we can see more young people work. But if you've not done any pastoral training with your team, think about it. There's some great stuff online. Ask your church. Engage in that. It's a time that we need to love well. Be flexible. Don't apply pressure to your team right now. Don't apply pressure. Hold things lightly. People are struggling right now, so maybe we've just, again, got to people, not programs. And finally, be bold. Be bold, take risks. Sometimes that boldness is actually asking somebody how they're doing, and when they go, yeah, good. Say, but how are you really doing? Because I'm struggling, it's tough. Be bold. Ask that young person, ask that adult, ask that family member. And we've just got a couple of minutes just to think about a last question before we wrap up, and that's, what are the 3 biggest needs of your youth, and what could you do? What are the 3 biggest needs for your youth, and what could you do? And I just want to, in the time we've got, just think about one simple thing that you might be able to do, whether it's starting tomorrow or next week. Let's just take a moment. And I'd love us to share very quickly back to encourage one another. Sorry to bring us back so quickly, but just love if if people could just give us one quick idea, one thought that you've had, because I guarantee one thing you thought of, everybody else in this room is going to be writing down.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know how
Dylan.
to use these, So we were talking about, are you feeling comfortable first in order to feel confident? And that being something that's quite important.
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. Good alliteration as well. Comfortable then confident. Really good. Thank you very much. Anybody else brave enough? Oh, yeah. Ebony.
I think all of us are finding that connection is a massive issue for our young people. And I think it's creating, like Dylan said, creating that space where they can connect and they can feel like, oh, actually, there are people that care and love them. So, yeah.
Nice, yeah, creating that space for connection. I'm going to pick on Lauren. Lauren, you had a great idea.
So I was just saying about how some of our older youth in our group have been quite distant. Some of them haven't really been attending. And I think there's been a lack of, on our side, maybe just support and offering just a casual environment for them just to voice their struggles, and in like a less structured, we have like Tuesday night youth, but I think one of the things we're looking to implement is like once a month just with the older kind of youth who are like in doing their A-levels and stuff, like they've got a lot going on, they've got a lot of pressure, just to kind of chill, know there's people there to listen and just offer them that support that maybe they don't have in other places.
Yeah. And brilliant what you said, make them feel comfortable so they can be confident, create that connection, and then, strange enough, that casual setting, what an amazing way and space to do that, to then be able to pray, to care, to share Jesus in a real format. We're emerging from really uncertain times into a whole new world. Right? It is strange, it is uncertain. However, I absolutely believe it is full of opportunity. And just to reiterate, I want to finish with a very quick story. I remember it being told me years ago, and these two shoe salesmen are sent to this country, and they get there, and the first one rings his boss, and he says, "Boss, forget it. It's useless. Nobody wears shoes." The second one rings back and says, "Boss, this is amazing. Nobody wears shoes." Because he could see the opportunity. And that's what we've got right now. We've got amazing opportunity. We've got to remember what we're building. There is huge opportunity. We've got to remember to be proactive over reactive. We've got to play the long game. And we've got to put people first before programs. Guys, it's been a pleasure to share with you today. And thank you. I say, do check out any of the resources we've got. You can also contact me off there if you've got any other questions or anything. But I'm excited. And is it all right if I just finish with a quick prayer? Yeah. Father God, as we come into this emerge from this time, I pray that you would help us to embed these thoughts, these ideas, that you would challenge us to think why and how. Father, I pray that you would help us to see with your eyes, to love with your heart, to hear with your ears. And Father, may we offer hope in word and deed and time. May we give that care and that love and that grace for our young people, for our teams, and also, Lord God, for ourselves. Help us to play long game as we believe that these young people are the church of today and the leaders of tomorrow. In your name, amen.
Thank you so much for that, Kieran. It was, really helpful, really insightful. Before we finish up today, we're actually, the kids workers are going to come